Ontario winemakers are hoping for a good year for their industry. It follows challenging times through the pandemic, the drop in tourism, and the impact of climate change. There's also a lot of concern here in Ontario for one area of the Canadian wine industry that's been struck by disaster. Al Sweeney has the story.
Ilya and Nadia Senchuk started this business 10 years ago with what they call the crazy idea of running their own winery.
We're truly living our dream, raising our kids on a farm, and that's what we've always wanted to do.
With a 10-acre vineyard, including French Burgundy grapes like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, along with others, they say they're doing more than $1.5 million a year in business. But there are challenges for small wineries, like adapting to climate change.
We don't really know what to expect year in and year out. So every harvest we find the swings really big. The wines themselves end up being good, but it's a lot of work.
They welcome an announcement by the federal government last week of continued support for small wineries. For them, it'll roughly cover the cost of a full-time employee.
It really just gives us the opportunity to stay competitive and to grow.
They're also keeping an eye on British Columbia. That province's wine industry was hit by brutal cold this winter that killed vines and may have wiped out more than 95% of BC's wine production for the year.
Our wine growers and farmers have been hit terribly hard by a cold snap this winter.
There are calls for a change to the rules that restrict the wine that can be shipped from one province to another.
We need to lessen the regulations so that we can bring in some grapes from Ontario and Washington State so our winemakers can continue to make some wine and stay in business.
Even though the British Columbia wine industry has been hit by a disaster this year, there's hope here that it could lead to positive changes for the entire Canadian wine industry.
So I really hope that Ontario wines and Ontario grapes make it in to BC and we work together as an industry. Anytime Canadian provinces are working together and we're working together to make better Canadian wine, I think that's amazing.
We should be there to support them.
They say increased demand in BC for Ontario grapes may push up prices somewhat, but Canadians should be looking at an overall Canadian industry.
I would rather them have Ontario grapes in their wines than international grapes. So I think that it's important that our neighbors are suffering with the cold snap.
There's no word yet on whether BC is going to allow more imports of Ontario grapes. But the Senchuks also suggest that other parts of the country, like Ontario, can learn from the BC disaster if the Canadian wine industry works together to help deal with climate change.